Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited about the topic we're talking about today, looking at how employers can greatly improve their talent pipeline, including by tapping into the pool of people who've been traditionally marginalized because of their backgrounds. Before we get started, though, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up on Wednesday, April 6th, and it's titled Managing the Human Impact of Digital Transformation. It's going to be particularly relevant for employers who are transitioning to new digital tools and monitoring the effects of this change on employees. Thanks to our partners, including today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who've joined today's webinar, and that would be you. I'm putting a link in the chat space so that you can take advantage of this one. The regular price for our conference tickets is $149. And this link gives you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. Now today, we'll be exploring the topic, improving the talent pipeline from end to end. From campus recruiting to the job offer, the hiring process has many steps where talent can be overlooked, blocked, or lost to competitors. What are the most effective ways in which employers can remove obstacles and boost engagement? And how can they make the most of other pathways besides recruiting, including internships and referrals? Our sponsor today is Lever. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Multiple systems, bad data, lackluster automation, and lack of staff bandwidth can make hiring more challenging than ever. With Lever's innovative talent acquisition software, you can move hiring mountains and bring on the quality candidates faster. Lever TRM is the industry's only complete ATS plus CRM solution. Its user-friendly features and built-in automation make talent sourcing, recruiting, nurturing, and hiring easier for companies of all sizes. Now, just a few quick logistical items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with a link for the video. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from both the Society of Human Resource Management and the HR Certification Institute. And look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Now, for all you participants, around 45 minutes into the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime you think of them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator today, someone who has mastered the art and science of moderating, Lydia Dishman. Lydia is a staff editor for Fast Company, who's an expert on topics including leadership, technology, and the workplace. Lydia has also written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, Popular Science, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And I would suspect that if you are with us for this hour, you're all too familiar with the state of hiring during the so-called Great Resignation. Yes, we know that millions of people have left their jobs over the past year, so it's no surprise that 93% of employers say they're planning to hire throughout 2022. That's according to Monster's Future of Work report. And that number is up 11% from last year. The good news is that while the unemployment rate stood at 3.8% last month, the labor force participation continues to rise. So there's still plenty of competition for talent. So experts are suggesting that the organizations that continue to prioritize the candidate experience right from the very beginning, all the way through onboarding and beyond, are the ones that stand the greatest chance of not only improving their talent pipeline, but hanging on to the talented workers that they do hire. So what do we need to find these people and usher them through the hiring process and add them to our teams? Here to discuss best practices are a diverse group of professionals who are ready to share their challenges, opportunities, and insights. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Briefly, tell us how your organization is working to change the traditional recruiting paradigm for starters. No pressure. Crystal, why don't we start with you?
I feel all the pressure. So Crystal Lannaman, I'm with BASF. It's a chemical company. And so we're a manufacturing company. And so I think the pressures that we're having to shift the recruiting or the attraction pipeline is twofold. One, on the manufacturing side, how do we make awareness or increase awareness of the type of opportunities and lifestyles that could be created in more of a manufacturing environment, because it's not necessarily the traditional job that you say you want to grow up to be, when you're in school. And then on the exempt side, it's really more of how do we ensure that our employee engagement and employee value proposition matches that to the candidate, to help ensure that the messages and communication is similar, so that we're attracting them and they're expecting one thing and they actually receive that on the inside once they've joined the community. And so just trying to balance that. I think it's hard enough. So I'm excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Angie, tell us what's going on at TIAA.
Hi, thank you. Angie Wesley. I would say that similar to probably many of us, we are really trying to shift the paradigm a little bit through further brand, obviously making sure that our brand is out there, but it's appealing to all the populations, not just how we see TIAA. So really adjusting our brand to whether it be women, whether it be our early talent, whether it be folks wanting to return to work that maybe was on a hiatus during the COVID in the past 2 years. And so making sure that they know who we are and what we're doing. I also think as we think about how we can appeal to different audiences, we are leveraging talent media differently. So we're thinking about our talent media strategy and really how we can show up and push information to people versus them having to go and look for it. And then lastly, similar to others, candidate experience is paramount. So they can have a fantastic experience, but when they come in here, we want that associate experience to be just as great, whether it's 1 year in or your 30-year in when you're retiring. And so we really have a lot of purposeful work happening right now around what we're calling our kind of associate experience, which includes that candidate journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. James. Celebrating women.
Yes, appropriate today on International Women's Day. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. James, I lead the Global Talent Acquisition Organization here at Western Union. We're an organization that hires in 45 countries across the globe. And so, really looking at how we are moving from a reactive talent acquisition function to being more proactive around what the business needs and wants are as we go forward. But also I think it's important recognizing that not one size fits all. So how we do it in certain jurisdictions, in certain countries, for certain skill sets varies from one country to the other. So it's really important that we understand some of our logisticals and cultural nuances in some of our locations. And I think just to echo some of my peers there, it really is about we're really focused on the candidate experience. And so, starting to think of our candidates as customers of our organization and making sure, regardless whether they're offered a position or they're not offered a position, they leave with a positive experience of interacting with us as an organization, especially as we see some of the pressure from the great resignation in our talent competitors. And we want to make sure that regardless of your stage in the process, that you have a positive interaction with us. And how do we benchmark that? And how do we get their feedback more real time? So lots of work going on there.
Absolutely. I'm going to dive into all of those things that all of you are talking about. I want to learn more about all of them. Deb, how about you go next?
Hey, good afternoon. So I'm Deb Hallmark, head of talent acquisition for CEC Entertainment. We're the parent company of Chuck E. Cheese, so go Chucky, Peter Piper Pizza, and Pasquale's Pizza and Wings. And we've spent the last 12 to 14 months as we saw the return to work, the reopening of our businesses after the COVID shutdown. And we've spent a lot of time in focus groups, so focus groups internally at all levels, but with candidates as well, trying to understand what each side is needing, what their perception of, this is working or this is broken, and a lot of time in studying just data, trying to marry up the two. And that as we do roll out some new things, and we have quite a bit over the last 6 to 8 months, that we're constantly measuring it. So the whole process and how we are looking at our solutions has changed in response to all that's happening in the world over the last couple of years.
I'm sure it's a challenge for you, but it's comforting to know that that all of your companies are looking at things in a different way. And Karla, I'm sure that Cisco is no stranger to making changes. Tell me about changing the paradigm of recruiting.
Oh, absolutely. And my peer group just stated it so well. I oversee the executive hiring and onboarding for our board members. Part of our remit is also responsible for the pipeline and talent across Cisco for all levels as well. And as it was stated, as our day-to-day is different, the core of what we do as employees remains the same. We think about our roles differently today. We deliver innovation, we support our employees, we work together as global teams, we drive incredible results, and we care for our communities. And if we just think about what we do in HR in general, as talent advisors, we're having to change what we do in TA. This is the future of work as we know it. We've had to live in a hybrid world. With Cisco, we offer that technology so we can see the differentiator in how we provide our services, how people can be productive, how we can operate day to day, the balance of family and kids at home. This is what we've all had to work through, and we're doing it well. We're transforming the way we work, how we're being innovative, addressing the skills gaps that was shared. We're thinking about talent in different ways, different site strategies. We're building different hubs across the country, which I think is fascinating because we no longer have to discuss, well, where do you reside and can you relocate?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Now it's how often can you travel when this restriction is lifted? We're slowly thinking about the way we work, which is just incredible. We're digitizing our platforms even more. As I shared, we're having that customer base as a true example of how we can operate fully and function and provide the infrastructure to do that. Candidate experience, as it was shared here, that's completely changed, right? Interviews are all video. We've changed our onboarding process, how we look at our assessments and how we interview. The conversations are different. What I think is fascinating about this world that we've had to make those adjustments to is that being all virtual, we can still lean in, we can still be productive, and we can move talent strategies forward. One other piece I'd add is now that we're offering these online platforms, we're providing those learning opportunities in a different way for our candidates, for our employees. We're looking at internal mobility in different facets as well, enhancing skill sets. And most importantly, it's how do we differentiate Cisco? It is a talent market out there. And that whole experience is incredible. So I'll pause there. It's just these last 2 years have been a learning experience, and it's just been fascinating to adjust to that and see talent in different ways, which is incredible.
I feel like the last 2 years, if you think about the trick that, like, you know, the waiter with the white linen tablecloth, like just yanks off the cloth, everything stays on the table. But more, we're in the place of let's set the cloth on a new table and reset it completely. And as you're all talking, I'm thinking about, you know, you're looking at all of these different things. You're looking at data, you're looking at changing processes. And Crystal, I'm thinking about one of the things that you said about, you know, people don't necessarily think of themselves going into manufacturing sector when they're thinking about their career path. So I wanted to start with this question with you is how are you positioning BASF to attract talent that may not even know that a career in manufacturing is on the table for them, on the newly set table?
Yeah, well, I think you hit two things with a nail on the head as you were speaking. I was like, oh, well, there's more work I need to add to my to-do list. But
sorry.
One is workforce development, right? And I think every company is thinking of that. And so how do we think about reskilling individuals to reconsider work or explore work in other areas? And or how do we attract a new caliber or type of employees to the workforce? So for example, in manufacturing, we struggle to find women. And you know what we hear back is oh, it's the shifts. And I'm like, well, nursing has a lot of women. They have the opposite problem, and they work shifts. That actually isn't really the rationale. So it's more of thinking through, I think, a true understanding and an honest reflection and an assessment of where we are. And each site and each location is different. But honestly, we're partnering with, you know, community colleges, middle schools, high schools to just bring more awareness to what this work can be. I think the big thing for people is the flexibility, right? So highlighting what the flexibility does or doesn't look like, the purpose. So how what you're doing has a bigger impact to the so what, right? A lot of people, especially in this new generation, care about that a little bit more than I think some of the previous generations. And then the other piece is just kind of more of what's the overall kind of package, right? So financially beneficial. How does this help you today? What will this look like a year from now, 5 years from now? You know, how do you end up getting to 6 figures doing this job that potentially you wouldn't even think of as the traditional 6-figure route? And so that's one of the kind of the initial things that we're doing. I think the other thing that we're doing is also looking more from a skill perspective of how do we address the new skill gaps that are coming, and how do we reframe and transition people to think differently about what their future career might be, and how either transferable skills or new skills can be added into that workflow for the individual to set them up for success for the future. So it's kind of depending on the person and the situation. You know, there are a few routes of how we're addressing that.
Well, almost a 360 or 180 type change in the type of people that you're trying to attract. Deb, when you were talking about reopening after COVID, and I know that there was kind of a war for talent, especially in hospitality and restaurants, and they were mostly competing on that hourly wage. So what is CEC doing? I mean, were you part of that, raising the minimum wage, or were you doing other things?
We've done a lot of things, to be honest. We have a lot of seasonality in our business, and we're also known out in the marketplace as a great first employer. So we have a lot of kids that'll come in, work a semester or two, go off, and maybe they'll bounce back at some point. But all that to say, around 17,000 hires or internal promos a year. It's a lot of movement. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's a lot of fun. And something that was just said a few minutes ago, and it's talking about the purpose. And so maybe people don't grow up thinking I'm going to have a career in restaurants. We know, we've got great restaurant hospitality programs out in our universities, but maybe that's not where a lot of people say they're going to land. But when you start making the emotional connection that we have with both of our two older brands, so Chucky and Peter Piper Pizza, that we are memory makers, and we talk to our employees about that, and they see it. We call it out: mom, dad, aunts, uncles, grandparents, sisters, and brothers snapping pictures at the birthday parties when someone just won a mammoth game, and they're going to get a lot of points and be able to go to the merchandise counter. So tapping into all that emotion, and people now have a connection. So it is a differentiator we have found for maybe the brand across the street.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having flashbacks of meeting Chucky myself at a 5-year-old's birthday party.
So did you scream, or did you go, "Hi, Chucky"?
Give him a big hug, because I'm a hugger.
Good. I'm glad we didn't fail you.
Well, and also I had to set a good example for the little children who were just like looking at the adults saying, "Is this okay?"
Exactly. Yeah.
So I did my part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angie, so this question is slightly different for you, because you were saying that you were changing the paradigm of the type of person that TIAA thought was their employee. So tell me about attracting somebody that you weren't thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think as we have, gone through this talent market that we're experiencing, it does push us to think differently around how we can leverage talent to run the business. No different than many. Obviously, the reskilling is there, but even as we think about our early talent, we are considering ways to bring in that early talent to maybe do roles in the past that we wouldn't have looked at them for. We are looking at the young minds that could be successful in, whether it be our IT space or even in some of our other spaces in the wealth management business, because we need that younger generation to be able to influence their generation as we think about investments, as we think about the way that they want to plan for their future. And so it's really a shift to where you don't necessarily need someone experienced. You just need someone that has the drive and understands, again, that purpose. and is thinking about it from their own set of eyes, or, you know, in their own shoes. And so we are making that shift now. We are definitely looking at even some of our technology to where we could leverage, you know, students right out of college that maybe don't want to do a rotational program, but they want to come in and do work specifically to an area. And where do we have that value that we could bring to them, whether it be a tech school, whether it be apprenticeships, whether it be full-time roles and stuff. So we are pushing our leaders that are probably in a different generation to think about that. We are also similar to Crystal's comment around women. Well, you know, we have a good demographic of women, but what we also want is to continue to over-index where we can. I mean, it's Women's History Month, so it's timely to talk about it. But we want women to be in those roles that maybe historically haven't been dominated by women or don't have the same opportunities in the past. And so being unapologetic in the how we recruit and attract some of that is really a change that we're making. And some of that is using our own voices, you know, as women. Some of it is using our early talent as voices versus us trying to be the platform. We're letting them be the platform.
Yeah, nothing like the first person account of, hey, I did this, you can too.
Right.
That's a very big attraction for, I know, a lot of people. Now, slightly shifting with James, you said 45 countries. So I have to believe that the approach, as you said, is not even, it's not one size fits all. It's not even one size fits most. So how do you juggle that?
Yeah, we're a fairly unique organization in the sense of, you know, we're headquartered here in the United States in Denver, Colorado, but actually our largest employee center is actually in Lithuania and Eastern Europe. And so we actually do, you know, much more hiring outside of the United States than we do domestically here in the US. And so for us, it's really, you know, we've spent over the last several years, lots of iterations of what the talent acquisition model looks like within the organization, where resources are based, how they align supporting sites versus job families and functions. And so we really have now a robust model of a regional team located in regions for some of these larger centers, supporting them so that they understand some of those cultural nuances of how we should be recruiting in those markets and building those relationships with the senior stakeholders regionally, as opposed to everything being run from a headquarter or corporate perspective. And I think also as well, you know, it's really around for the teams there is then building the infrastructure behind the recruiters, right? So we have a large team, we centralized our sourcing organizations, we have a large team of sourcers that support those regional teams in managing that talent pipeline so that we have more candidates ready when jobs are posted, as versus the recruiters really starting from scratch effectively as requisitions come in. And I think the last thing I think that's really important, and we've seen some real success for this, is, you know, we all work in the talent acquisition space. The business always wants us to, you know, do more, go faster, be cheaper. And one of the difficult conversations that we had internally here was, how many requisitions should each recruiter be working at any one time, and what does that optimum level look like? And so we have a model internally where not all requisitions are created equal, and so we know that certain requisitions will require much more, be much more time intensive from a TA perspective. And so we've got to a model now where we feel like we have the balance right between, we've seen great improvements in some of our time to offer and time to accept, because we reduced some of the recruiter thresholds in terms of the amount of requisitions that they were working. And so I think understanding that and some of the you know, the cultural nuances from, you know, the Middle East, where we might have 300 applications in the first hour and the recruiters are sifting through sand, no pun intended, trying to find the ideal candidate, versus other markets where we really need to be more aggressive and go out and find the candidates and attract them on our value proposition.
Fascinating. And so Karla, obviously Cisco's in how many countries? Put you on the spot there.
You can think about. My focus is obviously on what's going on with Ukraine right now.
But and I'm thinking about it in terms of you know, kind of what James said. I have to believe that there are certain positions that are the same regardless of the country that the worker is in. So is that part of the recruiting process the same, or are you tailoring it just country by country like Western Union is?
No, we have our standard recruiting strategy. Obviously, we like new site strategies, workforce planning, to your point, country by country. And just to put things in perspective, just globally, we hire between 14,000 to 16,000 people annually. We're a 75,000 person organization in over 260 countries. When you think about how we align those specific strategies, we also have our buckets of how we hire specific skill sets. So for instance, technology is a key component, and we're driving that emerging talent. So we're looking for developers, machine learning experts. We're trying to expand our software business in those specific areas. And it's become a key player in software. We're also looking at the competition in that space. We're thinking about what type of talent Cisco can add that can lead this competitive advantage, quite frankly. And the process for recruiting talent, and to your point, how we align that country by country and what we're looking for, we're aligning our talent strategy to the business strategy, and how we look at balancing that evaluation of candidates, their technical expertise, their culture fit is huge. We've also seen as an advantage for Cisco, developing our own internal talent as we look at what's needed in pockets of technology. Promotional velocity is important for Cisco. We have this motto that is one company, many careers. As I mentioned, we operate in hundreds of countries, and we like people to see that they have that career progression within the company. So we have different facets of how we build skill sets on top of their institutional knowledge that differentiates each person internally, how we identify the critical skills. For instance, adding new critical skills. How are we strengthening the existing foundational skills? How we ensure that they can navigate through what they can see a path forward. We're also looking at where we have a shortage of skill sets, because as I mentioned, our core routing and switching and hardware is the embodiment of what positions us as the competitor in the space. But when we think about expanding our skill sets to software and where we're going to play in that space competitively, we're looking at where do we think about the shortage of skill sets, aligning to the critical areas, that software development piece, the data science, et cetera, machine learning, and also encouraging our teams and leaders to continue to develop themselves as well. We're having talent expos where we have managers that are engaged and looking at talent across Cisco. For our hiring managers, we have leader learning labs, looking at skill sets, resources, how do we invest in our teams in different ways. I'd also like to add, how we project ourselves to our customers is huge as well, because we have to have the talent that can engage. So we have another tagline: reimagine your security, your apps, your data, and transform your infrastructure to empower your teams. So our leaders and teams are developing themselves continually to stay relevant. As Crystal mentioned, the upskilling, the reskilling, maintaining those skill sets or critical talent areas are key.
You brought this up, and Angie and Deb intimated it as well, about looking internally for talent and bringing them along the career path there. And I have to think, it's a great strategy for retention, especially during the Great Resignation, but just in general. Can any of you speak to how much of the company's strategy is looking internally to develop who you already have versus looking externally? You don't need to give, any hard numbers. Go ahead, Crystal.
I mean, I don't want to speak on anyone, but I would think that we probably all are, and we all have, right? And I think it has continued to increase in the last 2 years. But for us, it's a buy, build, develop kind of mindset and strategy where you have to look at all facets of it. And so from the internal piece, that's been huge in our employees' interest in retention and attrition, and trying to figure out how do we keep people. And even now it's more important than ever. But honestly, I would say if we weren't already working on it in the last year to year and a half, it's kind of late. It's almost too late to start now, right? If you haven't started, because you have to get everything kind of in place. So one of the things that we mentioned mentioned on a previous webinar is we have a marketplace, a talent marketplace, where talent can go and look for opportunities to do other project assignments where they can either do something similar in their career line or something completely different, just more based off of their interest. And so that way we get away from kind of the go-to players where you tend to give all the projects to. And it also allows the employee to have a little bit more autonomy and empowerment around how they get involved in projects. So that's one thing for us that's in the right direction and getting the conversations going too. So.
And Angie, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think it's everything that Crystal said, and it's interesting how we all use same language when we think about this universally. But I think once COVID hit, we became much more intentional around our mobility and how we were leveraging our talent internally. And we set very clear objectives, you know, all the way from our CEO and our EC level down to really try to move folks around, whether it be due to reorganizations or whether it just be organically. And we also set clear messages around how talent moves in certain areas. And so where mobility is going to be more fruitful versus where we're going to have to hire externally. And so those career mappings or those career paths in that cross over other leaders. So it takes you from one, let's just say client services, call center environment to more of a client facing wealth delivery model into a portfolio. So we've been very deliberate in trying to show those paths to our talent base internally, or where you could do digital in one space, but then you could come over here and do digital in another with marketing, or where you could do data for the client facing roles, or you could do data behind the scenes around systems and all the technologies that are happening. And so being a little bit more transparent on how folks can look at mobility and look at opportunity, I think has afforded us talent moves that we wouldn't have had in the past. And we've seen our internal mobility increase significantly over the past couple of years. And then we've also seen where it's created bottlenecks potentially or business risk because of the movement. It then could put somebody else in a position where we have to think more strategically about that talent and the gap that will happen as a result of it, which then, you know, goes back to workforce planning and being very upfront on what the needs are, projecting it, you know, for a whole year out, using historical data to leverage. And so I think we've gotten much more predictable in our workforce plan. And we, you know, have a team within my space that does all that in partnership from the financials as well, which then allows us to think about how much mobility movement we can take on versus what would then create pressures to the business execution.
Yeah, if I can add.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead, Karla.
I share the same sentiments when we talk about the internal mobility programs. Also, retention is huge, working through this great transformation, as we'll call it, and how do we keep them engaged, how we keep them energized. I think the point raised on just the mobility piece and affording them the opportunity for stretch assignments and also that visibility across function is huge. One specific program that's special at Cisco, we have a flex program that's usually for the early in career folks, because we want to nurture that next generation, of course. That's a completely different skill set and motivation that we want to continue to be engaged and feeling that they have a pathway in their careers. But there's a 3-term rotational. So every 18 months, they have an opportunity to look at specific roles. We have managers that are leaning in to ensure that those transferable skills are put into practice, and of course, exposing them to new skill sets. So at the end of the 3rd rotation, they have the opportunity, of course, budget permitting, and there's an allocated budget to do so. They can stay where they are or expand their skill sets to a specific role. But there's a nurturing aspect of that as well, where we have a great partnership and of course, ensuring the learning and of course, the mobility along the way. So they settle after engaging in so many different skill sets and learning what they like to do. So that's been a positive program for us.
James.
And I think I agree with everything my fellow panelists have shared. I think one of the kind of aha moments for us internally was, how do we leverage some of our talent data that we have already inside the HR organization? And so we obviously have a variety of talent calibration sessions with our HR partners across the board. But how do we get out of the cycle of our leaders wanting to hold on to the high performing talent and keep them within their own organization and structure? One of the downsides of the way that our HR organization was structured was it very much aligns to the business unit. And so one of the changes that we made is giving some of our executive recruiters more access to real-time talent data so that they can act as that bridge across the entire organization and say, well, actually we have a high performing individual who's ready for a move. And although there may not be a role in that specific structure, let's talk to them about an opportunity in another structure, another location. And so that we are, to the point my fellow panelists raised, we're doing more with our internal talent to get them ready for the next level role, as opposed to having our leaders constantly focus on their organization, their openings, and starting to broaden that horizon.
So all this has me thinking, the title of this was Improving the Talent Pipeline. So we immediately think that we're trying to get people in from the outside, 1, 2. And there's a case to be made for diversifying the talent pipeline. And you've heard me beat the drum on this forever about how good diversity is for a company. So if you've got these high performers inside, isn't it easier to say, well, they're already here, we'll just move them into this position without looking externally for candidates? So the question then becomes, how do you even make a case for somebody from a non-traditional background if your goal is to diversify the funnel that's coming from the outside? Then don't you have to work harder to have that person go up against somebody who's already in-house? I know there's no silver bullets for this, but who's raising their hand first?
So I'll take a shot. I mean, it's definitely a complex question that I think many of us all deal with. And I think one of the things that we are seeing in the industry with companies, and specifically what TIAA has done over the past couple of years, when we think about our job descriptions, we've been really deliberate in what we need versus what we like. And so we've dropped our education requirement in the majority of our jobs, which then allows us to have a broader pool of talent come in. Where we have education requirements, we can justify, a lawyer, an auditor for accounting or CPA, things like that. And so, and I was just before this meeting was talking to a senior exec, and I said, is it better to have someone enroll that we can find externally that can do 75%, or you can get them to that 90% mark in 6 months, a year, or let your job sit open for 6 or 9 months and have no one? What is the gain versus loss? And so I think we're having a lot of those conversations now more intentionally and being more transparent. And so when we think about talent, it's not always a single hit. It doesn't have to be in the bullseye. In some places it might, in technology or different things, but maybe it doesn't either. And so I think you can have a little bit of both. You can have that mobility and you can have that movement, because hopefully if that's happening, it's on a trajectory for that internal person that creates more expansion and growth for them, whether it's up or side by side, which then allows that other growth to come in from the outside. And so, I think we always will have to have a balance of both, because there's risk each ways. And so I think we're just trying to get smarter in a talent squeeze market on how we can do that.
I'd like to jump in on that. So just like we market externally, we've learned that we need to market and message internally as well. And so the perceived value for external hires may not have been as great at one time as what we wanted. And this was pre-COVID. So we learned over the years that as we started celebrating not just internal promotions, but the diversity in thought and experience and the richness it gives, we'll say mainly in our corporate office, what I'm talking about right now. But as we were showcasing that, we suddenly had VPs and SVPs coming to us saying, hey, I know we've talked for the last 2 years that maybe this person or this group would be next in the internal mobility for my organization. Let's go outside and see what we can find. But I don't think, because we had not done that well, there wasn't a perceived value on it. When we got intentional about it, again, just like we do externally, that started to shift. And I think the other thing that I would add, because we haven't talked a lot about that at this point, is we saw the market tightening up. When you think about it, pre-COVID, it was a 52-year low unemployment rate. We thought it couldn't get any worse, right? As professionals, TA professionals, it couldn't get any worse. We should never say that again. But we leaned into our different focus groups and we said, okay, where are the groups of people that could be available that we could possibly create a career path for them. So we looked at our internship program. We amped it up. We're really proud of that, and just some great hires that are coming from that, diversity and experience and thought and all the other areas that you want. Going back, and people that want to return to the workforce.
Yes.
If that's, parents that are stepping back in, is it someone that went to school and they've been out of the workforce? Is it a senior citizen? So we looked at that and some other different things. Those with disabilities, we have a great partnership with Autism Speaks. So we found pipelines of people that were available, ready to go and wanted to join us when we changed our own mindset. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for all of us. I hope I never slide back into where I was 2 years ago.
Absolutely. You've totally anticipated where I was going next with it. Was as with no, you're totally fine. I did have a question about people that had taken a career break, and you call it whatever you want, career break, sabbatical, left the workforce to be a caregiver. And I think that a lot of people did this in the last couple of years, whether they were forced to do it or not. But we know that so many women, particularly so many women of color, impacted by COVID, having to stay home to be caregivers. So how are you very specifically identifying people in these groups? I mean, Deb, you mentioned even too with disabilities, you have to very, very intentionally go after these different groups. So tell me some more best practices. Deb just gave us some ideas. Karla, you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is actually a great question because I can give you an extended notebook, if you will, of how we've done this differently, and we encourage it. We're leaning in from our market mapping, as you mentioned. How do we find this type of talent? We look at the total addressable market. It's looking at skill sets. It's not just looking at years in role, but do they have these particular marketing, business development, digitization type of skill sets that could apply to Cisco, and of course, possibly companies, even though they had a 2-year sabbatical, let's say, or a break in service, as I like to call it, they still have a trajectory of really aligned skill sets. So when you're pulling those Boolean searches, I'd like to say, and looking at that landscape,
That's a good way to put it.
We're able to bring forward, and I like to actually add this type of talent, but our recruiters have become talent advisors. So to be able to influence our hiring managers and looking at, complete skill sets with regard to, this type of profile, they calibrate, but let's also think about how we're looking at talent in different ways. Specifically, someone that's got the aligned skill sets, but may have taken a step away from the workforce. In the cases that I am referring to, these happen to be women as well, who obviously are intelligent. They have the astuteness, they have the gravitas to do the work, And it's fascinating to be able to present that. But I would say it's more of a pulling together the right type of profile and specs and looking at that specific talent and being able to present them in a way. And I even tell my recruiters, talk to these folks, because when you're engaged with their hiring manager, you can give them more than the just listed on their resume. They may say, gosh, they've been broken away from the industry for 2 years, but tell them why that's a benefit. They're refreshed, they're coming with a clean mindset. They have these skills and that pedigree that applies to the role. And guess what? I've talked to them, and this is why they're articulate. They would be a great culture fit. They'll do really well. So just a couple of things to add to that conversation. We lean in, and it's great to see our hiring managers react to it when we have the right type of talent and we've engaged.
I just have one quick thing.
Yeah.
Karla and Deb mentioned it, is the mindset, because we can go and find all these different sources to find the talent, but it's really more of really working with internal community and hiring managers to transform the way that they think about, it doesn't have to look apples to apples or how you've always done it. And so veterans, for example, we have a very intentional training with them of how do you read potentially a veteran's resume to see some of those transferable skills, the leadership that comes behind different things. And so that's one thing for me where, honestly, I don't think we have a problem with the sources sometimes. I think it's more on the hiring manager acceptance and awareness and unconscious bias, if you want to call it that, towards different things. And, it has to be equal footing and work on both sides of that to actually change the needle or change the lever if you want to make a move.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at with the previous question about hiring people from non-traditional backgrounds. I think that the intent there is always a good one, but good intentions don't actually always bring results. Like, you have to make a business case for hiring people from a non-traditional background. Let's say in the tech industry too, like, okay, they didn't go to Stanford or MIT. Maybe they went to a boot camp, but they still have the skills. So is there something else that you're using, let's say, as an assessment, like soft skills or transferable skills? Can we just unpack that for a moment before we get to our audience Q&A, because the questions are stacking up. But Angie, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so, I do think at least from my conversations externally, I do think this is a little bit of conundrum that we all are trying to constantly solve and peck at. I don't think there's a one-stop assessment that tells us somebody's going to be a good developer or somebody's going to pass the 63 and 6 and 7 to be a licensed rep. I think a lot of it is, or at least how we're trying to get some leverage is, let's just try it. Like, let's just do a quick pilot, 2 or 3, 4 or 5, something like that. In the bigger scheme of when we look at our technologists, that is minimum risk, but maybe very large gains. And so taking someone from a boot camp, taking someone that might be a liberal arts student that has a really good knack at analytics, data is showing some of those non-traditional backgrounds are more successful than their traditional backgrounds. And so let's put it to the test in real life. And so getting folks just to think about it that way, like, we're not going all in, let's just kind of put our toe in it for a minute and see what our successes look like. And if not, then let's talk about what didn't work, and how we can re-engage or redirect. And so that is what we're doing now. I mean, these boot camps are coming up a lot with a lot of third-party companies, reskilling people, whether it be in the veteran space, whether it just be people wanting to make a change. And some of them are targeting specific groups like women and stuff, which is a value add when you look at it. So our view is like, we don't have to go all in. Let's just take a chance.
And I think with that, Angie, is using those managers that you use in that pilot or just take a chance, because I love that, to actually communicate what you want to do moving forward. Because when it doesn't come from HR or the business case who gets approved by senior level leaders, it's the middle level managers who actually make the day-to-day happen. And if they don't change their mindset, it really kind of creates the bottleneck. So I love being able to leverage those leaders in the from the pilot. So
yeah, and I think it's finding who your ambassadors are in the businesses, who your folks are that are a little bit more on the edge to try stuff, or even like, I was just on with our head of CS&T, so our tech and ops world. He's new to the company. And he's like, let's do a mashup video. I don't think you get many executives talking about a mashup video about women. And so I think it's really refreshing when you can find that support, or you can ask for that
Sure.
support to help try some of these things, to continue to innovate for talent and do what's best for them.
If there was ever a moment to put spaghetti on the wall, this is it, right? Karla, what were you going to say?
Yes, perfect. I literally stole the words so that I was say. So we launched a new initiative. It's called the 110 Initiative, with others in the industry. And this is exactly what we're discussing here, the non-traditional talent. And it's taking those that do not have a degree. So talk about that, not just the break in service with the pedigree, but also these folks do not have a full 4-year degree. Partnering with hiring managers, as Angie just shared and Crystal alluded to, that are able to think about work in different ways, what types of projects and of course experience do I need to have in this person's background, but someone that doesn't have that traditional 4-year degree, X amount of technology. We are about 8 months into this program, and we're at 12 people that we've hired. And these aren't just contractors. These are people that are embedded within Cisco, but we're also giving them the training and the resources that they need to acclimate. I think one, I would say, reflection point of this that we're seeing the feedback come through is now we're looking at those basic skill sets like corporate representation and how they show up, and knowing their audience, because these folks did not come from those traditional corporate backgrounds, but we're willing to put that investment in them. And our hiring managers are seeing the success from these folks. So it's been great to have others that are on board with this and thinking about talent in different ways. And it's working.
Well, there's the proof right there. Okay, let's flip over to audience questions. We've got so many. I was going to ask this myself, are you focusing on spotting and developing particular soft skills right now? I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but please feel free. Someone raise your hand. Soft skills?
Here, I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Deb.
So I'll give you an example, and we're growing our PMO office, and we said for that, some of the soft skills that we wanted to really zero in on were problem solving, flexibility, critical thinking, and communication. When you take those, because they're so important to a strong project manager, and combine that with experience, combine that with some behavioral interview questions, and draw that out. And you think about, we do probably all of us pre-hire assessments. It's the same thing, aggregating your whole. And I love what we've talked a little bit about, and that's changing mindset. So when we were able to come and say, look, here's the soft skills, here's the behavioral responses that we had, here's the experience, here's the degree or no degree, here's what your aggregate looks like. It's like we're providing, I'll say word pictures, right? We're going to give you a picture of what this looks like. So talking it out, or as one person on my team says, speak it into existence. But having those conversations, and it works. It's no different from a TA professional getting on the phone and describing someone before they send the resume over. It's the same thing, but we're building the package of this is what this person offers you, and it aligns with what you said you needed for this particular position. So
I would emphasize the communication soft skills, and that using that as a kind of a broad umbrella in reference to with more virtual interactions, learnings, how do you communicate yourself? How do you show up, whether via video, via email, and writing, over the phone, but more specifically too, in how do you address, I'll say inclusive moments or opportunities for more inclusive moments. So how do you address when something doesn't feel right or how you feel left out versus just kind of sweeping it under the rug, and really kind of enabling managers and employees to handle that type of conversation, because sometimes it can get tricky and people avoid it.
Communication, so important. Empathy, so important. Hard to measure, but totally necessary right now. Switching to something that is measurable, is compensation right now becoming a factor in keeping prospects active in the pipeline? Compensation.
Oh,
Karla?
yeah, I'll chime in there. Fabulous question, because in this evaluation of the great transformation. We're thinking about the what ifs. What can we do to retain our talent? It is an incredible market out there, especially with the restrictions lifted of needing to relocate and thinking about work and this whole hybrid workforce scenario. And you can literally log in your laptop from the beach if you'd like to, as long as you're productive. And that's enticing.
Sure is.
In the essence of that, how we consider compensation. So we have had this whole pay parity approach to looking at our market reference ranges. How do we compare with our larger conglomerates in the market? Looking at the competitive landscape there. We've raised our tiers in terms of how we are re-envisioning different levels, scope, span of control, remits, location strategies, as I mentioned, that are aligned to that pay scale. When people exit, I have these conversations often. What is your rationale for leaving? It is, I can gain X amount of percentage more than what I'm making here with the same type of role. So how do we combat that? How do we get in front of that? And if we look at the data, we're thinking about the different components differently. Some people are monetarily motivated, so they like to see the cash up front. Some like the investment of stock. So we're looking at our RSUs and those grants in different ways, our cycles of promotions. We have what's called connected recognition, more of a spot bonus. We have key player awards that we award our talent, and we're allowing our managers to have the budget to think about their talent and not really rank the highest performers, but be able to pay more balanced and disproportionately in what they see as their discretionary fund and how they're paying their talent. We did a complete company alignment to the, as I mentioned, the market reference ranges, and we've increased that over the last 12 months. It still doesn't stop the phenomenon of the attraction of the market and what entices folks to look elsewhere. So those are just some of the components of our comp philosophy that we've engaged and increased.
Okay. James, you wanted to add? Because I was going to come to you next with another question, but go on.
Okay. I think I echo everything that Karla said. I think that for me, one of the successes here at Western Union has been the partnership across the HR organization, from our HR business partners to our comp partners. And so it's no longer that one size fits all, or market ranges are looked at once per year, and you need an act of Congress to go outside the market ranges. And so it's really built partnerships across the HR organization so that we can truly get the right talent and understand that the market is moving so quickly. So if we need to make decisions real time in a requisition in order to secure a talent, let's make that decision, but then also be clear on what does that mean for our current people in the organization, right? In terms of bringing in that internal pay equity. And so seeing a lot more flexibility and a lot more fluid communication internally within HR. I definitely think that's helped us navigate some of those challenges that you described.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so many questions. And here's the inevitable one. I was waiting for this one. Are you finding you have to adjust benefit packages to meet the demands of today's workforce? This is like a yes or no for me, but are you changing anything, Angie?
So I would say yes. I actually think we started doing this even at the point of COVID, because there were different needs of our talent base, of our current associates. So I think we are having to evolve our benefits, and some of it is from how we can attract the talent, but I think it's also evolving just how to take care of our own associates, whether that be through additional mental health resources, additional ways to think about what flex time really means, or what taking time away is, giving them resources to experts in the field versus just relying on their management or their HR partner. Some of it is around childcare, so giving the opportunity for these folks to be able to still work that want to, that might have otherwise had to have left the market due to COVID. Creating additional needs that now might create dependent care for them that are above and beyond what existed before. So I think we all are thinking about things, and everyone might tweak it a little bit, but in most cases now, it's really just more educating and explaining how they use it, because a lot of benefits go unused.
Karla?
I was going to just echo and real quickly, I know we're coming against time. What we've instituted literally last week is a flexible work week. So we're having a pilot across specific business groups where they're working 10-hour days for 4 days and they have Friday off. In international companies,
I love this idea.
Is talk about the opportunity to unplug, because with COVID, as Angie mentioned, we have worked an upteen amount of hours and never stop, with the balance of family and elderly and care, and to just focus on the work and say, look, Friday, go into your weekend. But ensure that you're doing the 10-hour work days. Let's make sure you have the flexibility to perform to that. And we've had such great feedback, and people feel like they have that balance of being able to work hard and then also take some time away, even that extra day, what they can do differently. So it's worked tremendously. Yeah.
Well, that is our time, even though we have so many more questions. So I encourage you attendees, please feel free to reach out to any of our phenomenal panelists via LinkedIn, via their organization's website. Angie, Crystal, James, Deb, and Karla, thank you so much for this terrific discussion. I enjoyed it. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Lydia. It looks like we're going to need a sequel. There's so much to say here at a very relevant point. So thanks to our speakers for such a thoughtful and dynamic conversation. There were lots of specific tips and takeaways for our audience. Thanks also to our sponsor, Lever, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website at fromday1.co and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll mention 3 real quickly. Tomorrow, Wednesday, March 9th, is our monthly conference. We'll be talking about enhancing total rewards to fit the workforce's new expectations. Tuesday, March 15th, we'll be focusing on talent without boundaries, finding remote workers wherever they live. And Thursday, March 17th, we'll be discussing how managers can acknowledge both accomplishments and challenges. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.